anything else with ground. And I'd urge you to somewhat reconsider that. Number one reason is because a productive pasture receives the same amount of rainfall and sunlight as corn, soybeans, or any other grain crop. If you have the right mix of plants and the right management, you can produce just as much biomass and just as much revenue, if not more, from pasture than you can from grain crops. The other thing I want you to reconsider is the incorporation of perennial sods into a crop rotation. When we started with this cover cropping thing, we'd look at something like all that trampled rye back behind you here and say, man, look at all that mulch. Boy, when that rots, that's going to make a lot of organic matter. And we found that it did, but not nearly to the degree that we expected. Because what we've discovered, and as you listen to Christine this afternoon, the big driving force behind soil organic matter increase is not from crop residue rotting down. It comes from soil microbes that live off root exudates. Annual crops have itty-bitty root systems that only live a short period of time, and annuals survive by producing seed. So a lot of that carbohydrate in an annual plant goes up. And annuals produce a lot of top growth. That's what we observe. We say, man, that annual is really productive. That's going to make a lot of soil organic matter. Not the case. The perennial, with the smaller top, but the monstrous root system, has a root system that lives 12 months out of the year instead of 5, and has a huge amount of root exudates. So, I want you to think about the potential of putting a perennial sod into your crop rotation. There are a few people doing that. Is anybody doing that now?
On a small scale. I have a market garden.
Okay.
On a small scale. Use it as a living mulch.
Oh, okay.
Green manure.
Sure. Yeah. Last year I did my first crop out of a sod, and I like what I see. I really like it. But the other thing about the perennial sod is if you have the right species, the right diversity, the right management, it can be extremely profitable. And so we're going to take a look through the species and kind of figure out, okay, what are the species that are going to make the most sense for you? This first one is sandfoin, and the sandfoin is this stuff here. One drawback of sandfoin is a legume. It's non-bloating because it has a content of condensed tannin. And I'll talk about some secondary compounds, tannin being one of the primary ones, that confer some animal benefits. The tannin will complex with, these clovers over here will cause bloat in an animal. The tannin in sandfoin will bind with the bloat-causing protein in alfalfa and clovers and turn into bypass protein that actually increases animal performance. Tannin also is toxic to internal parasites like brown stomach worms. Very effective at reducing intestinal parasite loads. Sandfoin is very, very tolerant of dry, calcareous, high limestone gravel soils, very drought tolerant. Unfortunately, it does not compete very well with other vegetation. So I don't ever recommend planting it alone. Always plant it in a mix with some other things, help keep the weeds down. It's also not very grazing tolerant. It can be very productive, but once it's grazed in the spring, now it might get this tall in the spring, but that's the last you really see of it. It might just regrow about that much the entire rest of the summer. So It's a neat plant.
Yeah.
Works well in a mix. I would not go whole hog on. Every once in a while a magazine article comes out that just promotes sainfoin as, you know, this is going to replace alfalfa, and it won't. Not in this part of the world. But it is a valuable component of a mixture. Next legume, strawberry clover. You can tell strawberry clover looks a lot like the white clovers here. Very similar characteristics and quality. The difference of strawberry clover versus the white clovers is that it's very salt tolerant. And if any of you deal with salty spots, you know it's hard to get anything to grow in those areas. And strawberry clover is one of those. It's used extensively in the California river valleys where they have salt issues. It's used in Australia where they have salt issues. This seed is something we did get from Australia. So very excited about the potential of strawberry clover to help remediate some of those areas where we just can't get anything else to grow. White clover. White clover is kind of the standard among legumes for quality. Higher protein, higher digestibility than really any of these other legumes. Drawback of white clover is that it has very shallow roots, has no drought tolerance, no heat tolerance. And so it's been kind of iffy out here in the plains. We're trying to, I'd say not we, but plant breeders are trying to remedy that situation through breeding, and they're making some really good strides. Now here you can't see a lot of difference between these three varieties. Where white clover has water, all the varieties work. But luckily, and the reason we put this perennial plot where we did is so each entry could be in the irrigated portion and have some out there in the dryland corner where the sprinkler didn't hit. Where the sprinkler did not hit, that variety died, this variety died, this variety lived and did quite well. The renovation came out of the Noble Research Institute in southern Oklahoma. It was developed to live through hot, dry summers, and which we have basically all over the plains. So I think this is, if you want a white clover in your system, this is definitely one to keep your eye on. Another potential clover that I think has some real merit is one that's called Aberlasting. We didn't get seed in time to get into this plot, but Aberlasting is a hybrid between white clover and Kura clover. Kura clover is extremely deep-rooted and drought tolerant. In all other respects is like white clover, except it takes about 3 years to establish. White clover establishes very quickly, but is shallow-rooted, drought susceptible. You hybridize the two, you get the best of both worlds. Very, very excited about the Aberlasting. I think it's going to be a home run product for us. Everything I've seen so far out of it is very positive. And anytime anyone has a question or a comment, chime in, please. So I can listen to myself talk all day long, but I'm sure you guys would like a break from that. Got a couple of red clover varieties. The main benefit of we've got the medium red, which is just the common stuff on the market. The Southern Belle. The difference between an improved variety of red clover and the medium red is disease tolerance. You can see this is year 2 of this stand. There's not a lot of difference between these two. Look pretty much the same. Next year, you come here, there will be a very distinct advantage to the named variety, because typically red clover plants they're short-lived because they are killed out by root-attacking diseases, primarily anthracnose. And the improved varieties will have better tolerance to anthracnose. So the individual plants, instead of living 2 years, might live 3 or 4. In a long-term pasture situation, That's important. If you do this, you're reseeding every other year. This, you can reseed half that often. So that's a very distinct advantage to the better varieties of red clover. Yeah, you pay an extra quarter a pound up front, but you only have to seed it half as often. That's big, yeah.
Sometimes, like, we grow a lot of white clover, and I've noticed when we go back in and reseed, we struggle the second time with a stand. If it's something in the soil, but like this, if you were going to reseed this, do you think you would get the same stand the second time?
I typically see that. One of the biggest limiting factors to clover establishment, believe it or not, is crickets. Crickets, slugs. I mean, compared to grass, this is just a nutritional powerhouse for every insect. And clover seedlings are so much more attractive than the surrounding grasses that I had a pasture that I seeded smooth brome pasture. I seeded red clover into 4 years in a row. 4 years in a row I had failures. And then the summer of the 4th year I had a grasshopper issue. I spread some bait to control the grasshoppers. The next spring I said, I'm tired of wasting my money on clovers. It's too dry around here to grow clover. Didn't put a pound of seed out there, and I got a stand of red clover that looked about like this. 4 years worth of seed, just that survived but when I spread the bait to kill the grasshoppers, I also killed the crickets. And ever since then, whenever I have a clover seeding failure, that's the first thing I look at is crickets. So soil pH can have a big problem as well. Yes?
You have mine seems to reestablish itself sometimes. There's a management thing there, I'm sure.
Yes.
How does that work? What have you?
Okay. What? Obviously, if you look at this clover, it's starting to turn brown, so it's ripening seed. If you give red clover about a 60-day rest in between grazings, it will produce ripe seed. You won't do it on a 30-day rotation, but 60, 90-day. I typically try to give my stands at least a 60-day, if not 75-day rest sometime in the summer, and let that seed ripen. And you turn cattle in once all these seed pods are brown, they'll scatter it through their manure and trample it into the ground. And you can maintain a red clover stand indefinitely through reseeding. So, good question, thank you. You don't have to buy new seed. You can manage for reseeding. So, Alsite clover. This is not Alsite clover. Yeah. This is yellow blossom sweet clover. And we don't have it in the plot because it's not a perennial, it's a biennial, but it is a very beneficial plant because of this big taproot. This is a great soil improver. It will tolerate extremely poor soil. It is a biennial instead of a perennial, so it actually fits better into a crop rotation than a perennial. But I think this is really an underutilized cover crop plant. A lot of the barriers to using this, though, are finding where it fits in a modern crop rotation. And but as far as a plant, a lot of top growth, a lot of pollen, nectar, great root system, a lot of nitrogen. So it has some benefits. The Alsite clover, this stuff here with the little kind of whitish pink flowers, its claim to fame is its flood tolerance. It is a very wet feet tolerant clover. It's usually used in wet areas where other clovers do not thrive. And it excels for that purpose. Very good forage quality with one drawback, and that is that it has some toxic properties to horses. If you are pasturing horses, do not use Alsite clover. And that's about all I know about the toxic properties about it, but horses do not like it. Next legume, bird's foot trefoil. And you can see trefoil is not very competitive against weeds. It's slow growing. It is fairly long-lived and reseeds itself very well. But like the sandfoin, it contains the condensed tannins that help reduce bloat. There's been research in Canada where they were as little as 10% of the diet being bird's foot trefoil or sandfoin, the other 90% being pre-bloom alfalfa. They were able to eliminate bloat. So it is, in my experience, it works extremely well, except for that one knothead cow that insists on eating nothing but alfalfa. So it's not 100%. If you do manage grazing, where you force animals to eat everything in a paddock, or try everything in a paddock before moving on, it works better yet. But very, very effective at reducing bloat. Also improves animal performance, and it is pretty tolerant of wet feet and salt. And most plants are not tolerant of both those conditions, but trefoil is. We've got several alfalfas. I'll step out of the way so you can kind of see down through here the different alfalfa types. They are starting to differentiate a little bit here. And alfalfa in general, I think, is really overlooked as a pasture plant. People are so scared of bloat that they refuse to use alfalfa as a pasture plant. And I think they're really missing the boat. If you manage alfalfa, it'll produce more protein, more nitrogen per acre than any other pasture plant we can grow. And meat and milk are both protein. You don't get protein without having nitrogen. And nothing makes more nitrogen per acre in a perennial system than alfalfa. So this has a huge amount of potential. And if you can manage the alfalfa is a perfect pasture plant except for two things. Animals kill alfalfa and alfalfa kills animals. Other than that, it's great. But there are ways of managing around that. Rotational grazing, the more rapidly you move, the less your risk becomes. Pasturing after bloat, combining with tannin-containing plants. There's a number of feed supplements like Rumensin, Bloat Guard, Bovatec, all help reduce bloat potential. Mixing with grasses, plant diversity. Those can all give you a measure of safety when pasturing alfalfa. I've been pasturing alfalfa for about 20 years now at my place. As far as alfalfa varieties, this is common alfalfa. This is something that is produced for us in South Dakota. We know its origin, we're very comfortable with it. Common alfalfa, when you buy common alfalfa, it's like going to the bar on Saturday night. Everybody puts their spouse's name in a hat, and everybody at the end of the night draws a name out, and that's who you go home with for the rest of your life. You may get an upgrade. Chances are you won't. That's common alfalfa, because common alfalfa is whatever someone combined and decided to sell as alfalfa seed. You may get a very good variety. Chances are you won't. We're very confident in this because we know the source. So I don't have a problem with us marketing this. As you can see, it's pretty good. As far as the named varieties that we have, we've got the low lig, which is a low lignin. It is not a GMO. It is natural breeding, designed to maintain higher forage quality at bloom. So if you're producing hay, market hay, this is a variety I'd steer you to. The Nitro Graze is a recessed crown variety. The crown is down below ground where it's protected from hoof traffic, wheel traffic. Makes the plant a lot more persistent. especially under grazing. If you are in a grazing situation, I'd kind of steer you towards the nitrograze. The branched root alfalfa, I forget the name of it. Foothold, yes. The branched root alfalfa, in wet, low-lying areas, alfalfa roots tend to rot off. And if the only thing you have is a taproot, that plant's going to have a hard time surviving. The branched root alfalfa, if the bottom of the plant root rots off, it will shoot roots off to the side that enable it to survive in those wet areas. Probably not as good a wetland plant as some of the clovers or other options, but if you want pure alfalfa in a wet area, this is going to give you some options there. This one, take a look at this stuff. This I am very excited about. This is an alfalfa we got from Australia. It is a fall 7 dormancy. Now usually, if you understand how fall dormancy works in alfalfa, the higher the dormancy score, essentially the higher yielding it is. Everything else equal. Because it will put more into top growth in between cuttings. The drawback of that is if it is putting above ground growth, especially in the fall, you lose winter hardiness. This is a fall dormant 7, this is a 2, these are 4s. That's the extra yield you get out of that higher dormancy score. Problem is that comes at the sacrifice of winter hardiness. But this is also a recessed crown. So instead of that crown being above ground where it's exposed to the weather, it's down below ground where it's protected. So my theory was that by combining a recessed crown and a high dormancy, we can get high production without winter kill. We had a very severe winter here. It survived just fine. Now we do have a lot of ryegrass in it. We did not get seed from Australia in time. We got some from a guy in Texas that had some, and this stuff came in with his seed, unfortunately, all the ryegrass. But it does appear to be a very productive plant. If you think there's a difference now, come back in October. It's about 4-to-1 in favor of the Australian alfalfa. I'm very excited about the potential of this. If it continues to survive winters, it's a home run.
And you hay it and bale it the same. I mean, graze it and bale it.
Yeah, yeah, it'll bale fine. It does seem to be coarser stemmed. I think it's going to take a hit in relative feed value compared to, especially to the low lig. Seems to have a bigger stem, but as far as cow hay, I think it's just fine.
Blossoms? Will it blossom like the common alfalfa?
It'll bloom. It does bloom on a different schedule though. It actually seems to bloom a little bit quicker, so, which is good in a rotation. Yeah.
The low leg alfalfa seems to not stand as erect.
Yeah.
So we'll give it a go 45 days if it's all matted down.
Yeah, your low lignin alfalfas in general tend to lodge worse because the role of lignin in that stem is to hold it upright. So you don't want to leave it sitting out in the field very long.
But that's one of the selling points of it in hay production.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you don't want to leave it out there. I mean, of course, the people who are wanting to produce quality hay are usually cutting it early bloom anyway. But shouldn't sit out there that long if that's what your goal is. Now, usually when people plant pastures, they think about grass first, because when we think about grass and pasture are kind of used interchangeably as terms. Turn cattle out to grass. Well, there's more than grass in that pasture. Oh yeah, there's legumes too, and we like grass for the yield, we like legumes for the nitrogen, but there's other plants out there that have benefits, and some of those benefits are the secondary plant compounds. This chicory here, I mean, you look up and down here, what's the most productive species that we've got in this plot? right here. This is not a grass and it's not a legume. It's a forb. And it's got roots that go halfway to China. Extremely deep tap roots. These leaves are extremely digestible, up in close to 90% digestibility, over 20% protein. And if you buy it, if you look at the tag on a bag of cattle mineral, in this area in particular, it'll be very high in copper, zinc, and phosphorus, because those are the three minerals that grazing livestock tend to be deficient in. And this will have, if you look at the NRC, National Research Council, recommendations for percent copper or percent phosphorus in a livestock diet, it'll be about 0.3. Everything we've talked about so far on good soil will be about 0.25. They're all deficient. This will be around 0.6 to 7. It'll have double the phosphorus content than an animal needs in the diet. It'll be about double the copper, double the zinc of what an animal needs. Everything else is deficient in those. So sticking these in can give you a very bioavailable mineral package. Also, this contains the tannins, like the trefoil and the sandfoin, that help reduce bloat and expel internal parasites. I think this is an extremely useful pasture plant. It's also got some other secondary compounds in there that we're just finding out about. I think it's a great plant. To me, it's the most impressive plant in this plot. Kind of an alfalfa timetable, either early, like April 1st or September 1st, kind of that time frame.
Dale, what's dry matter percentage?
What's that?
Dry matter percentage on that chicory.
It's pretty wet. It's pretty watery. And seems to maintain a pretty watery content.
You have to have a higher seeding rate to obtain those higher mineral benefits that you describe it.
Not sure. I suppose you could do the math and figure out how much you need, but 10-20% of the diet's probably going to be enough to. And that's going to vary soil by soil.
Right.
Not saying this can replace livestock mineral, but it could sure supplement. So it may be able to, but I'm not going to make that promise because it really depends on soil. I mean, we're in a glacial derived soil here, but you go south, they don't have that. So plantain is another forb. Again, very high mineral content, very high digestibility, but that's not what makes plantain special. It contains an antimicrobial compound in it, a natural antibiotic. In fact, they found research in Eastern Europe. They have taken the urine from cows that grazed on plantain and found that even 36 hours after ingestion, the urine was an effective antibiotic. Now, I'm not sure anybody wants to take that, but it just a testimony to how effective this antimicrobial quality is. Excuse me. So not only is it an effective antibiotic full of minerals, vitamins, so forth, but that antimicrobial compound is also active in the rumen. It kills off the microbes that emit methane. Now, the methane production, there are people that worry about that because methane is a greenhouse gas. More importantly, the methane producers are less efficient at converting feed into meat. If you can eliminate those methane producers that are less efficient, you get about 10% better feed conversion. You get about 10% better animal daily gain. And there's some research in Australia that shows that you have about 10% plantain in the diet, you get about 10% better average daily gain. And so that's big. And it comes with some environmental benefits as well. So when 60 Minutes comes and shoves a camera in your face, what are you doing about methane? I'm planting plantain. So, and I'm doing it completely selflessly to save the planet. The increased average daily gain's just gravy, right?
Does that the antibiotic have an effect on the methanotropes in the soil?
Doesn't seem to.
No. Okay.
No. I'm not aware of any effects. So. But good question, and I think Christine will probably talk about methanotropes later. It's a very fascinating deal. Orchard grass, of course, we're in a relatively dry area. Orchard grass historically has been considered kind of a humid area grass. The older varieties, that's very true. The newer varieties of orchard grass, and this is persist, the new varieties of orchard grass have much better drought tolerance, much better rust resistance than the older varieties. And so I've gone from saying orchard grass doesn't belong out here to saying, yeah, orchard grass is a good component of a mixture. It really does confer some benefits. Orchard grass will regrow better during the summer than most of your cool season grasses. You get continual regrowth instead of just a spring flush and then you're done. So it's a nice species to include in the mix. It is a bunch grass and does not spread. So it competes less with legumes than something like smooth brome that tends to take over. So nice in a mixture. I don't know if I would try to use it as a solo species. Now what we've got here, these are 3 different varieties of a species called prairie brome. And prairie brome is a short-lived perennial. It's a bunch grass. It is extremely easy to establish. It is extremely high quality. It does like nitrogen. It does not have nitrogen. You get this not very impressive growth, but when it gets some groceries, it really takes off. One of the real benefits of prairie brome, and Matua over here is kind of the first one that was introduced into the U.S., is these seed heads, which most grass varieties, once grass heads out, becomes very unpalatable. These seed heads are actually, livestock like them. They will eat the seed, they'll eat the seed heads, and that's a real benefit for something like this where you want a cool season grass that you're not going to be able to graze till this time of year and still have some quality. A couple of bromes here. We've got meadow brome and smooth brome. If you look at them, they both look very similar. It's hard to tell one from the other, but they behave completely differently. Smooth brome is a sod former, spreads by rhizomes. It really grows well in the spring and then doesn't do anything the rest of the summer, which is why a lot of people don't like smooth brome. It is a great conservation grass because it does spread and form a good sod. Meadow brome behaves very much like orchard grass. It is a bunch grass that regrows very well after grazing, which smooth brome does not. So the meadow brome, I use meadow brome and orchard grass in a lot of mixtures because of that good regrowth, the good seasonal distribution. I usually put 1 pound of smooth brome in my mixtures per acre. And that's to fill in gaps when the other grasses don't get a good stand, because it will thicken up. The orchard grass and the meadow brome don't very well. We have a couple of wheat grasses here. This one over here is western wheatgrass. It's a native wheatgrass. It is very tough, very drought tolerant, and does spread through rhizomes, so it will thicken up. The pubescent wheatgrass here, as you can see, is quite a bit more productive. This is like the western wheatgrass, is very drought tolerant, and this is recommended down to about 12 inches of annual rainfall, which is about half of what we average here. You can see, even though we've had a fairly dry year, it's performed very well. Very similar to intermediate wheatgrass, easy to establish. This one does tend to spread better than intermediate wheatgrass. So great product. I think that this has some real merit in dryland pasture mixes. So keep an eye out for this.
Feed quality about the same as intermediate.
Yeah.
The best.
Yeah, it's pretty much indistinguishable from intermediate as far as how it feeds, how it pastures. Just spreads a little bit better, and it's slightly more drought tolerant.
A little less likely to get pollen rank.
What's that?
A little less, get a little bit better utilization on it because it spreads more.
Yeah. Doesn't get quite so clumpy. So, Timothy here. Timothy is used extensively back east. In my opinion, that's where it ought to stay. It has no heat tolerance, no drought tolerance, no grazing tolerance. It is pretty decent as a hay grass under irrigation for the horse market, because for some people, for some reason, someone started a rumor a long time ago that Timothy is good horse hay. It's really no better than broom or any other cool season grass, but it has a reputation. So there's a market for Timothy hay in horse circles. As far as I'm concerned, it really has no value out here. So I encourage people not to use Timothy. Ryegrasses and ryegrass derivatives. Perennial ryegrass is a fantastic quality grass in places like New Zealand, Ireland, where they have moderate temperatures and frequent rainfall. Perennial ryegrass is the standard for grasses, for quality. Tolerates grazing very well. A lot of the quality of ryegrass comes because it maintains, the first product of photosynthesis is glucose. And glucose is very, very good growth promoting sugar in plants as far as livestock, forage quality. Most cool season grasses take that glucose, convert it as soon as possible into fructosan, which increases the heat, drought, and winter survivability of those grasses. That's why those grasses tolerate heat, drought, and winter better than ryegrass. But ryegrass has much better forage quality, promotes animal gains and fattening much better than these other grasses. How do you get the best of both worlds? One attempt was with this Fesculoleum. Fesculoleum is a hybrid between meadow fescue and perennial ryegrass. Trying to get the toughness of fescue with the quality of ryegrass. And they succeeded. The only problem is that Fesculoleum usually will only live about 2 years, and then it dies out. So the way we use the Fesculoleum and the prairie brooms is either, if you want a short-term stand for 2-3 years and no longer than that, good grasses. If you want to add it to a mixture of slow developing species so you get more first year production, use this. But it is a great quality boost. One guy I know just broadcast 5 pounds an acre of ryegrass every year, just like you would with red clover or white clover, just to get a good quality boost in your perennial grass pastures. And he's very happy with how that's performed for him. Fescues. There's 3 types of fescue on the market. One that's been around forever, Kentucky 31. 31 stands for 1931. This is, closing in on 100-year-old genetics here. And this is still the #1 selling pasture grass in the United States, which is really, really sad. It's kind of like, that would be like saying that the Model T is still the #1 selling vehicle in the United States. do not plant this stuff. The endophyte produces a toxin that just really hammers animal performance. However, it also improves the heat and drought tolerance of the grass. So it does have some benefits to the plant, but not to the grazing animal. So once they discovered that in the 70s, they developed endophyte-free varieties. They studied it, they figured out how to get the fescue without the endophyte, and so we got endophyte-free varieties like this Kentucky 32. If you turn around, you'll see that this plant got eaten, this plant got trampled. And so it is really a big difference in palatability, big difference in animal performance. But they found out that when you take the endophyte out, the plant loses its heat and drought tolerance. So what they've done since is they've developed novel endophytes, plants with endophytes that do not produce toxins. So if you are planting fescue, if you're in an area where cool season grass, orchard grass does well, where conditions are mild, you don't have a lot of heat and drought, endophyte free works very well. If you are out here where we are marginal in rainfall and we have heat and drought, I would plant a novel endophyte. They do cost more, but that expense is well worth it because you shouldn't have to replant it every so often like you do an endophyte free. So what we've got over here is essentially, this is a pasture blend that I put together that contains most of those species. We did leave some out. We left out the endophyte fescue and we left out a couple others. But how's the productivity of this compared to anything over there? Good. I love the looks of this. In fact, this is kind of the pasture mix I try to grow on my place.
How long do the cows eat this chicory stuff?
When it gets to this stage, not very well. When it's in this stage, extremely well. It's one of the first things they'll come in there and eat. This should have been grazed earlier than this, but one really intriguing thing, if you turn around and look behind you, what would you say the consumption was there when they had a choice? Now, part of that's because this is the south end and they walk into the wind and congregate, and kind of shoo flies and stuff. But they're only in here 6 hours. A lot of that is because when you blend plants together, there's a phenomenon called quorum sensing that goes on below ground, where plants will actually share microbial metabolites. The root exudates from this, the bacteria will digest that, and they'll produce compounds that get taken up by the plant next to it. You just get a whole underground economy where plants share resources that are mediated by microbes, and each of these plants becomes healthier. And in order for that to happen, you have to have multiple plant families, and we are just scratching the surface on understanding that. The only thing I know about that process is that it happens, and that's the level of my understanding right there. But one of the neat things about this is not just the diversity, and you won't be able to see it here because it got grazed off. These plots we inoculated with mycorrhizal fungi, and right now, if you look out here, you can't see a lot of difference between it. About the only difference I notice is that the weed biomass is greater over here, like with the kochia, than over here. And the kochia is stunted and yellow here and dark green over here. My kochia are not benefited by mycorrhizal fungi. So over here, the plant roots of the perennials are more competitive. And so the kochia cannot get what it needs over here, and it can over here. But other than that, not a big difference here. where we got irrigation last summer. Over there, where the sprinkler didn't hit, the biomass probably double here what it was over here. And the guys that were here, if you want to see that difference, in a couple days we're going to post up the videos we took from a couple weeks ago in this plot, prior to that being grazed, and you'll see a pretty distinct advantage to where we inoculated with the mycorrhizal fungi.
You inoculated with what?
Mycorrhizal fungi. So, and I'm sure Christine will discuss that, but mycorrhizal fungi help with drought tolerance and nutrient uptake, and they make a huge difference, especially on perennial. Another benefit of the perennial and mycorrhizal fungi, I mean, not only do you have the establishment, the better drought tolerance, nutrient uptake, but the mycorrhizal fungi on a perennial will produce spores that can carry over into the next crops in the rotation and confer drought tolerance and fertilizer efficiency to those crops later on.